In this video, we're going to learn how to navigate and set up mark points in the F-15E Strike Eagle. All right, everybody, welcome aboard the F-15E Strike Eagle, and we're going to go over some additional navigation. Right now, we're heading to steer point 1 alpha, and we've talked about this a little bit in the past with autopilot. We can turn on autopilot, go to nav mode, steering, but if you want to learn more about that, you can find that other video about autopilot. But what we're going to do is actually talk about some of these points. So we've got steer point 1 alpha, so that is our waypoint. If we look at the TSD, we can see that it is here off of the nose. If we look at our HSI, we can see that it's here in front of us. You can see your steer point 1 alpha, 280 at 10 miles and closing. And we can see up here, that little tick mark is pointing at the 28. And we look here, navigation, 9.3. So we are in the air-to-air mode right now. According to Natso, this is typically how the F-15 guys would fly around. They really didn't fly around in navigation mode, but if we go into nav mode, we can see we get a little bit additional information, our time, how quickly we're going to get there. All right, so that's all well and good. And in the previous video, we talked about navigation. We showed how to add an additional waypoint by going to the F10 map, getting some information, or somebody passes some information onto us, so we can add that waypoint in. But now what we're going to talk about a little bit is mark points. All right, so a mark point is essentially a point that we're going to create either with the aircraft, you could call it a flyover point, or we can create it with the targeting pod. So first, let's talk about how to create it just with the aircraft. So let's say that we fly over a point, and for whatever reason, we want to remember where this point is. We can use it maybe to anchor ourselves on or orient someone else. So all we do is look down here, and we can see mark, and I'm going to hit that, and we're going to see some information populate. There we go. So mark point 0. And here's all the information. So here is the actual lat long for that point, the elevation as the aircraft understands it based on terrain elevation database that it's got on board. And as I talked about in a previous video, we go to UTM, we don't get anything there. We still got the information. We can't do that backdoor necessarily with this procedure. So right now, all we have is the lat long. Hopefully, eventually, we'll be able to transmit this information. I'm assuming this is transmit to headquarters and transmit to, I guess, the flight. But right now, we can just pass these numbers on to someone if we needed to give them this mark point. An additional way to set up a mark point is I'm going to take control of the pod, just kind of move it around. And down here at the bottom, we see target. We can keep clicking that button there until we get to mark. So I'm going to go to point track. I'm going to zoom in. A point track on something. We'll say this hangar right here, and I'm going to use the TDC button or the TDC control and hit the Z-axis press, and there we go. Mark point 1 is saved. Mark point 1 is saved here. So once again, we have that data. Once again, we cannot pull up the UTM, but we've got the lat long and the elevation of that mark point. All right, so how do we use this information beyond just getting this data? Can we navigate to it? So yes, we can. It's a little bit finicky, but it makes sense once you think about it. All right, so we're going to go back to the main menu. So right now we're on steer point 1 alpha, and I want to go to mark point 0. That's what we had, the first one. So what I'm going to do is down here is I'm going to hit Shift and 5, because that's where the M is at. So I've got 5, and we said 0. And shabam, there we go. We've got mark point 0 is 96, heading 96 and 15 miles, so it's back behind us. We can see it on the HSI. Once again, we've got it as our active waypoint, so we've got the heading caret, and we've got nav right here. Now, this is where it can maybe trip you up if you're not thinking about it. So let's say I want to go back to steer point 1 alpha. So, the old way, I would just hit 1 and 2 and all that jazz, so I'm going to hit 1. And we can see that we went to 1. However, if we're paying attention, we notice it still says M. So as you get into the mark points, it thinks you want to stay with the mark point. So you can see that it pulled up mark point 1. It's still indicating mark point 0 right there, but all the other data changed. So I'm assuming that everything's correct. It still shows mark point 0. So obviously we're still in early access, and this is part of the things that we discover while we're doing this stuff. But if I want to go back to steer point 1 alpha. I've actually got to type in 1 shift alpha. And now we're back to steer point 1 alpha. We've got our heading caret, we've got our nav data, and we've got our HSI and our information there. Now if we look at the TSD, we can see those 2 mark points that we dropped, those little triangles down there. So it gives us another layer of situational awareness. Now again, hopefully soon we'll get the ability to transmit. That's going to be fantastic. It's going to help out a lot. And of course, hopefully we get UTM, the ability to just put in some grids. Lat long can be very challenging to deal with, more challenging, I'll say, than UTM. UTM is pretty straightforward. Now, how can we use this? Of course, dropping a mark point with our pod, or if we fly over, let's say that we're flying over and suddenly we take fire from something. And this happens in the helicopter world too. It was very handy to be able to just drop a point, all right? Drop a waypoint or a mark point, whatever the aircraft wants to call it, because it's something that you can immediately cue back in on, right? So if, let's say we're transiting from point A to point B and we're going across 30, 40 miles or even more, and suddenly something happens. If we can drop a mark point very quickly and then get away, now we've got something we can orient back on instead of trying to remember, okay, which hill were we flying past when that happened? All right, so it's something that we can get oriented back on wherever something was happening and start actioning that target if we need to. Additionally, of course, being able to drop a mark point with your targeting pod gives you that information, that lat long. So we do have the lat long displayed on the pod. As we move it around, we can see it's kind of changing a little bit. But as you're moving stuff around, it's changing. You may not want to remember that. So if you want to start, if you're doing some sort of reconnaissance or you're trying to pass some information on to someone else that's coming in to hit a target, then of course you can save all that data with your mark points from the targeting pod, pass that data on to the follow-on mission. Now the last thing I'll leave you with is this when it comes to navigation. Don't forget that when we drop a designation point, a target point, that's going to start overriding some of this navigation. So we're in air-to-ground mode, we're in auto HUD right now, and I'm going to hit the pickle button. And that immediately sets up a target. We're going to go over here to our HSI, and we can see that that has added a new point. We can also see that our steer point is changing. All right, so as I turn, you're going to see it start coming off to the right, and you can see this information, 2 miles, 12 seconds. Just don't forget about that. If you start dropping designation points, it's going to treat that as a navigation point because it thinks that that's what you're trying to get back to. All right, so just something to keep in mind. It may get you a little bit turned around, and even in autopilot, if you start dropping designation points, the autopilot will then basically try to fly you to those points, put you in an orbit overhead. So if you drop a point and you just did it for whatever reason you want to get rid of it, use that boat switch aft. That'll remove that designation point and put you back into where you were. All right, that's pretty much all I got to say about this. Hopefully that gets you guys going. I'm sure there's probably lots of other tricks and things that guys are figuring out. If so, please put them down in the comments below. We'll take a look at them. Maybe it's something we can make a video out of. Or if nothing else, people read the comments and they learn for themselves. Hope you guys are enjoying it. We'll talk to you later. Take it easy.